fine because it happens sometimes. All right, and I should actually just make sure I've got my teaching notes open. That would be a really good idea as well. So that will just take me a second to get in there and get those notes up on my other computer. I hope your day is going well, and I hope that all this COVID nonsense hasn't been too much of a challenge for you. Okay, and I'm gonna make sure we have the chat box open so that if anyone has questions, they can ask them. And I'm gonna put my telephone on airplane mode as well because it always rings at the wrong time. There we go. So here we are. We are talking today about burps, heartburn, and toots. And so, you have to be really careful what you say. It's funny because I was posting about digestion on Instagram and I used the hashtag stinky farts. And I got a message back saying I couldn't say that because some people had reported that as being offensive. I went, oh, for Pete's sake. At any rate, I guess if you've got nothing better to do than complain, then I guess you're going to complain. Today, though, we are talking about digestion, particularly in adults, because it's interesting that our digestion changes with time. It changes with age. Just as a newborn baby can't digest, steak and potatoes, as we get older, we might not be able to digest steak and potatoes. And by older, I mean, if you're over 55 or 60, you might have some problems there. So we're going to talk about the digestive system, how it is supposed to work, and some of the challenges that we face with the digestive system as we move along. So as we look at this little diagram here, what we see is we have the esophagus coming down to the stomach that connects to the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestines, then follows along to all these small intestines, connects down here to the large intestine. This is the appendix down here. And the large intestine or the colon or the large bowel, whatever you want to call it, we have the ascending, the transverse, the descending to the sigmoid, the rectum, and the anus. We also have the liver, which is an auxiliary organ, and the gallbladder, which is an auxiliary organ, and the pancreas, which is an auxiliary organ for the digestive process. So as we look at this, just a real quick little rundown of what happens when we eat and we're chewing food and it's in our mouth. Those enzymes in that saliva that's in the mouth are designed to break down carbohydrates. Your teeth are designed to mechanically break everything down so that the enzymes for proteins and fats can do their job further down the system. So the mouth is only about carbohydrates and about mechanically breaking things down into very small particles. When we get to the stomach, the mouth is alkaline. That's important too. The stomach is acidic, and its entire job is to make sure that we are digesting proteins. Did I put this on record? I did. Good. Is to digest proteins. So the only thing that digests properly in the stomach is proteins. Now, this is an important thing because proteins cannot digest properly in the presence of carbohydrates. So we do a steak and potato dinner. The potato is actually going to neutralize the acid in the stomach and prevent you from digesting the steak. All right, so that's an important thing for us to know. When the proteins, particularly in the stomach, are adequately coated with the acid and they're starting to break down properly, then things get passed into the small intestine. Now, the small intestine, the beginning of the small intestine, right up here, this duodenum, is the only place that fats are digested. And they are digested courtesy of the liver producing bile, which is backwashed into the gallbladder. And when we eat something fatty, the gallbladder squirts the bile out into the small intestine to finish breaking down the fats in the diet. Now, if we don't have a gallbladder, if it was removed and incinerated, what it means is that rather than having having that burst of bile when we need it, we have a steady drip of bile, whether we need it or not. So when we don't have a gallbladder, we may not, probably won't digest fats properly. All right, so then the small intestine's purpose is to absorb nutrients. And the large intestine's purpose is to absorb some nutrients, but mostly to reabsorb fluid that we can recycle to keep our bodies hydrated. Okay, and that's why as the food stuff from the intestines, it's really soupy, really runny. It gets passed into the large intestine, and the fluid is absorbed until we have a somewhat solid waste that we can poop out. So let's talk about some of the causes of heartburn and indigestion and gastroesophageal reflux disease, GERD. The first and most significant cause of every one of those problems is what's called a Heidel hernia. When we talk about a Heidel hernia, it's also called locked diaphragm. You're going to hear medical doctors will call it Heidel hernia. Chiropractors will call it a locked diaphragm. And so what that means is that, I'm just going to pull that down, is that we have the diaphragm coming across here. So that would be the diaphragm is coming across here, roughly. And in that diaphragm, which is of course the muscle that goes up and down, that when it goes down, it creates a vacuum in the lungs. It pulls down on the lungs, and that allows air to rush in. And when it comes up, then it pushes the air out. So that's how breathing happens. But in the middle of that diaphragm, there's a hole. And in that hole, that is where the esophagus goes down from the mouth through the diaphragm to the stomach. When that stomach starts to work its way up through the hole, we get this little bubble of stomach tissue above the diaphragm. This is where we get a lot of indigestion, heartburn, and GERD, because now we have an alkaline esophagus. We have this little bit of acidic stomach tissue that now has pressure. Think of this as like a balloon, and we've squeezed a part of the balloon, and there's a lot of pressure in this part of the balloon that's above the diaphragm now. And that makes it so much easier for whatever's acidic in here to backwash up the esophagus and into that alkaline tissue and create the burn and the discomfort and the tension and the pain that we feel with a hiatal hernia. So some symptoms of a hiatal hernia are things like heartburn, regurgitation of fluid or liquids into the mouth. So if that's happening a lot, acid reflux, difficulty swallowing. What happens when this is happening is the whole esophagus becomes inflamed and begins to get coated with mucus to protect itself from the acid of this little bubble here. And so that can inflame the throat. It can make you feel like you've got a lump of mucus in your throat all the time and you can't get rid of it. It's just there. We'll see a chest or abdominal pain, shortness of breath, because the diaphragm now is trapped. It cannot move. It cannot move easily. I'm going to show you a quick little screening tool to use for this. Or vomiting of blood or passing black stool, which would mean that now we're into an ulcerated situation, right? Because now we're bleeding internally. If you're thinking, I wonder if that could be me, here's a really easy screening tool. I'm going to stand up and you're going to watch. I don't know, my camera's big enough to show you what I need you to see. Okay, let's see. Okay, we can do this. So what I want you to do, if you suspect this is a problem, is I want you to just stand really relaxed and take a really deep breath. And I want you to do this in front of a mirror so you can watch your shoulders and you can watch your belly. So the first thing I do is with that deep breath is take a deep breath, just, and what does your body do when you do that? Now you probably noticed that with me, it was all, that means the diaphragm is moving. If on the other hand, we see, and it's all in the shoulders, it means the only way we could inflate the lungs was to lift the shoulders. And if we're having to lift the shoulders, it means the diaphragm is stuck. Does that make sense? And if the diaphragm is stuck, we've probably got a Heidel hernia going on. If on the other hand, we're going, that is the diaphragm going down, moving properly, which means there's no Heidel hernia. Because if there was, when we breathed, the diaphragm would not be moving. Does that make sense? So if the diaphragm is locked, if it's not moving, there's likely a Heidel hernia that is impeding its movement, and that is going to cause likely heartburn and all kinds of issues. So what do we do about this? There's a whole bunch of things we can do about this. First thing is get assessed. An osteopath or a chiropractor are your best options here. Doctors, when they assess this, all they're going to do is antacids. If it's really bad, they'll suggest surgery. There are other ways to deal with this. One of the ones that I really like, and it's really simple, it takes a while to work, but I've had a lot of clients have good success with it, is in the morning, first thing in the morning, empty stomach, they've just popped out of bed, I have them drink about 2 cups of warm water. So not necessarily hot water, but warm, not cold, because cold is going to defeat the purpose. Have them drink that on an empty stomach, and then either get onto a rebounder, so a mini trampoline, or just on the ground, have them do heel drops, and do that for about a minute. So now you're not going to be able to see what my feet are doing, but it's going to look like this. I go, so I drink that water and I do this for about a full minute. And that's the first step. And then the second step is to do diaphragm crunches, which you want to put your hands up, and then you want to go for about a minute to tone the diaphragm. So what we're doing with this is we're using the warmth of the water to relax everything that's internal. And then by doing the heel drops, we're using gravity to begin pulling the stomach down. We do that every day for a minute. And then when we do the panting and we're really working that diaphragm, it helps to retonify those abdominal muscles and helps to reset them to be where they need to be. Is this a quick answer? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's going to take time. If you've got this problem, you didn't work into it overnight, you're not going to work out of it overnight. Herbs that we can use to help mitigate the heartburn. Slippery elm is an excellent one. Now, slippery elm, what I like to do with it is just take it by the capsule. You might need up to 6 capsules a day, maybe more. Very mucilaginous, very nourishing, very gentle, and really great for the GI tract. It just helps everything kind of move through really nicely without being overstimulating. We also like the UC3J formula, which is a blend of herbs that is very anti-inflammatory for the digestive tract and very soothing as well. So it can really be beneficial. Now, if you're really finding that you've got a lot of that heartburn and that discomfort, then the stomach comfort product is the way to go. So this is a chewable tablet that has slippery elm and some other ingredients in it, a little bit of calcium. I think it's calcium carbonate in that, which is great for neutralizing acid. And you just chew those down, and it's the natural answer to Tums, right? It's going to coat the esophagus, protect it from any acid that's refluxing, and neutralize any excess acid with the calcium carbonate. These are all Band-Aids. And I totally admit these are Band-Aids. These are to buy you time to resolve the issue. What if you've got an ulcer? When we talk about ulcers, we need to look at this emotionally from the perspective of what's eating you up, right? Ulcers usually come from emotional things where we've got the stress. And literally, there's been some really interesting research that shows that, yeah, H. pylori bacteria is involved, but the H. pylori bacteria, we've all got it. And it's an opportunistic thing. It moves in once the damage is done, right? And so it's not causing the ulcer, it's the result of the ulcer. And so we need to look at what's eating you up. We need to look at what have you done to yourself that maybe created this. I think that a couple of years ago when my husband was working out of town with my son, he left town on the Sunday night to go down to my son's place, and he knew he had a dental problem. And he just thought, well, I can't get into the dentist to get this fixed before I leave because it started up on the weekend. So I'm just going to, this is the herbalist husband, slap, slap. And he decided he was going to piggyback Tylenol and Advil. And he was doing like 2 of each, 2 Tylenol, and then 2 or 3 hours later, 2 Advil, 2 or 3 hours later, 2 Tylenol to keep this abscess pain down. Well, after about 3 days, in our phone conversation that evening, he said, I really don't feel good. My gut just feels awful. And by the time he got home, it was obvious that he had actually created an ulcer for himself. So we got him into the dentist, got that issue dealt with, but then we had to heal up his stomach. So there's either the emotion things or there are chemical things that we can do that will create ulcers. So what do we want to do about ulcers? We've got a couple of things that work. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do here. There's a lot on a really elementary level. The ULCR Plus is a really excellent product for this. It's got the deglycerinated licorice, which helps to deal with the H. pylori bacteria, but it also has those mucilaginous herbs like the slippery elm kinds of things that help to coat the stomach and help to just to kind of put a slimy Band-Aid layer over it to let the stomach tissue heal, right? Silver Shield is a brilliant liquid that, again, can really stimulate healing of tissues, whether it's an ulcer or any other damaged tissue. So these are the kinds of things that we used with him. We did a lot more than that. Like he was drinking aloe vera juice, and we did lots with him to heal that up. What if you don't have enough acid or enzymes? Now, how do you know if you don't have enough acid or enzymes? Let's talk about this very specifically. We need to figure out what's going on. What are your symptoms of this? So symptoms of not having enough acid or enzymes would be primarily burping a lot or passing gas. So we need to then look at what is the time frame for this. If we're burping fairly quickly after a meal, that's usually that you're not handling your carbs very well. If you find that you're burping a couple of hours after the meal, that's usually that you're not handling your protein very well. So if you're not handling carbs, that's one enzyme we need to be looking at. If you're not handling protein, that's another one. Not handling fats doesn't usually show up as burping. If we're looking further on down the GI tract, then we need to look at, are you also passing gas, or are you passing gas instead of burping? If, in your opinion, and this is going to be a little bit on the crude edge, but it's the best assessment tool we've got. If when you're passing gas, it's just air, then it's probably just that you swallowed a lot of air. If, on the other hand, in your opinion, it's like there's an odor, but it's like whatever, it's nothing significant, that's usually a carbohydrate problem where you didn't digest the carbs are fermenting in the gut, and carbs, when they ferment, create a slightly sweet odor. If, on the other hand, it's protein that's not digesting, when you pass gas, that gas is going to be, and I'm not being facetious here, it's going to be eye-watering and room clearing. It's going to be, holy Hannah, can't believe that came out of my body, right? So that would be a protein problem. So what are we going to do about this? First off, if we're looking at the burping fairly soon after a meal, we want to look at the order in which we are eating our foods. Most of us in North America tend to have meals that are a protein, a starch, and maybe some salad, right? And so, or some low carb vegetables. So we want to look at how that gets dealt with in the digestive tract. You remember earlier I said that carbohydrates neutralize your ability to digest protein very well. Okay. And so if we're finding that the burps are happening within, within a few minutes to a few hours after you've eaten, then we want to look at how you're eating your food. What order do you consume the components of your meal in? And so we always want to start with the carbohydrate first. Start with the carb, chew it well, get it going down. So if that's the potatoes, the rice, the pasta, anything that is high carbohydrate. Then you want to have your salad, or your low carb vegetables. So this would be, if you're doing a salad, that's great. That's your leafy greens, or if you've got broccoli or cauliflower or green beans or asparagus, for instance, the low carb vegetables, that can be the second step of your meal. The last step of your meal is your protein. The reason we do that is because carbs, when they're consumed on their own, can actually move through the stomach pretty quickly and get on their way. Then the low carb things don't really take a lot of enzymes. They just take a lot of chewing. There's more fiber in there than there is carbohydrate or protein. And so we use that as the buffer. We get the carbs moving through, then we eat the things that don't have much carb in them, don't have much protein, and it kind of helps to push the carbs on out of the system. So that by the time we put the protein in, and we're lingering after our meals, we're not inhaling our meals, right? We're taking time to eat each section of the meal, so that by the time we get to the protein, the stomach is either relatively empty or has primarily the low carb things in it, and the stomach acids are regenerating. So we put the protein in, then the protein can take its sweet time in the stomach to digest properly with those acids before it gets passed into the small intestine. If with all of that you're going, yeah, I think I've got problems with my carbs, then we want to look at using something like the garden essence enzymes. And we want to take them at the very beginning of the meal. So we take the enzymes, then we eat our starchy component. Then we eat our salad, then we eat our protein. If we feel like it's the protein that's more of the issue, then we still want to keep our sequence the same, but we want to take the protein digestive aid, which is your hydrochloric acid supplement, at the very end of the meal. So protein goes in, protein digestive aid goes in on top of that to complete the digestive process. If we're thinking it's both, then we can start the meal with the garden essence, go to the carbs, the low carb, the protein, and the protein digestive aid. Or we can try using the digestive enzymes instead, which tend to be a more broad spectrum enzyme. I do actually, when I'm working with people where I know they've had their gallbladder removed, I like the digestive enzymes the best because they contain ox bile, which helps to replace your natural bile and helps you to emulsify fats. All right. What if we're looking at someone who maybe has colitis, Crohn's, or celiac disease? So these are situations where the intestinal tract is severely inflamed, where there is an inflammation always means that there's a lot of other stuff going on in there. Obviously, we need to simplify the diet. We need to clean up any foods that might be perpetuating the inflammation. We might, with these people, want to have them do just a bone broth for literally a couple of days. And the bone broth, an 8-hour bone broth versus a 72-hour cook on the bone broth totally changes the chemistry of the bone broth. And so we need to experiment to find how long to cook the bone broth to make it be the right chemistry for the person. And with that, then we are probably going to want to go into the UC3J, which again is a really great anti-inflammatory, soothing, lubricating formulation for the intestinal tract. What about constipation? So constipation is anything less than one easily passed semi-solid to slightly solid bowel movement for every meal you eat. Most of North America is constipated to one degree or not. So, or another rather. The medical world says as long as you're having bowel movements, you're fine. If you have one bowel movement every 5 days and you've always been that way, then that's your normal, that's okay. And yet it's funny that they say that, because we know that the incidence of colorectal cancer skyrockets when people have less than one bowel movement a day. So how can they say that a bowel movement every 5 days is fine? It's not. We really need to have it going in and out in 18 to 24 hours. So how do you check that? Well, you check that by literally taking corn. Don't eat corn for a couple of weeks, then eat a whole bunch of corn, like whole kernel corn. And you're never going to hear me say this again. Don't chew it. Just swallow it whole. Just let it go down, because we want to use it as a marker. So if you eat your corn at 6 p.m. today, when do you see it come through? Now, some people say, I see it in 18 hours. That's ideal. I see it in 24. That's just fine. See it in 36. Yeah, we're getting a little sluggish there. I didn't see it at all, which means it has fermented and rotted in their gut. Their gut held on to it far too long, because we as humans do not have an enzyme to break down the kind of cellulose that is in corn. And so when people say, I didn't see the corn at all, we know that their bowel transit time is way too long. Even though they might be having one bowel movement a day, we want to consider that it's like the core from Christmas wrapping paper. And if we start sticking cotton balls in one end, nothing's coming out, nothing's coming out, nothing's coming out, nothing's coming out, until that tube is full. And then we start getting cotton balls coming out the other end, right? It's not that the first cotton ball goes in and moves its own way through and falls out, which is what we want to have happen in our gut. We want it just to be moving in a timely fashion. But when people are having a bowel movement every day and they don't ever see the corn, it means that their colon is only evacuating because it's completely full. And basically it's not doing its squeezy peristalsis thing to get things moving through very well. Not a healthy situation. So how do we deal with this? Magnesium complex works for many people to speed it up. Also helps if people have muscle cramps. Also often helps if people have issues with sleeping. So that can be something to work with. LBS2 and LBX are both bowel tonics. They are herbal bowel tonics that feed and nourish the liver and the bowel. The liver is so important in bowel movements because the bile is a natural laxative. And when we've got the bile, it helps the bowel to be stimulated to move things through. So LBS, LBX are great for getting things to move through. If inherently your body has a sluggish bowel, and if you can talk to your mom and she says, yeah, you were always constipated as a kid, chances are that's your inherent, how you were put together. And you may need to use LBS or LBX for the rest of your life to keep the bowel moving well. It's really no different than eating. It's really choosing the right supplement and using it almost as a food. Sometimes just taking the enzymes like the garden essence or the digestive enzymes will get things moving through really well. Sometimes it's not actually a bowel problem, it's that the mouth and the stomach didn't do their jobs to break things down. So now the intestines are going, all right, you guys, you didn't do the job. We're going to hold on to this longer in an effort to try to break it down because you didn't do it right. And yet the intestines are not equipped to do that. And so digesting the food, breaking it down chemically more efficiently often helps the intestines to work better. The UC3J, again, is a lubricant. It's a soother. It's a lubricant for the bowel. It can help things move through. And I got to tell you, this Ultrabiome DTX, it's my new first love. Not my first love. That would be my husband. And so the Ultrabiome DTX, I love this. I keep a sample of it on my desk to show all my clients that need this. This is a beautiful product for helping the bowel to work better, to get things moving through, to reduce the amount of fermentation that's going on. It tastes good. It looks gross because it's very green, but it tastes really good. And I find that a lot of my people are very happy using about 1/3 of a packet per day. Super easy. So that's the Ultrabiome DTX. Chronic diarrhea. Chronic diarrhea is a problem because what it means is that the intestinal lining is super, super irritated. And it means that the intestinal lining is literally pulling fluid from the blood and from the lymphatic system to keep whatever is in the gut really liquid, to get it moving through even faster, like to just shoot it through the system. And so we want to actually slow that down. We want to heal the gut and slow it down, because the faster things move through the system, the less opportunity you have to assimilate nutrients. So things like the UC3J are really great for that. Silver Shield, again, can be very healing for the gut. And that's just, you can do like about 1 ounce a day of that, just a liquid. It tastes a little bit tinny, just going to swallow it back. Black walnut, if the chronic diarrhea is actually because of parasites, then black walnut or the Towhee pack can do a remarkable job of helping to get rid of the parasites. And the Ultrabiome DTX, I've worked with clients who had chronic diarrhea, like we're talking liquid bowel movements 5 to 6 times a day. And we start them with just the tiniest, like we actually have them weigh it out, and it might be 1 gram. This is 13 grams in this package, 1 gram or 2 pinches of this a day. And it's remarkable how this has helped to reverse their symptoms, which suggests that it may be healing the gut. So really, really good for that. All right, so I know that for one of the people who is on the webinar with us today, one of the concerns was the effect of stress on the gut and on digestion, and how stress stops digestion. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about that. When we are under stress, and we need to not just think of the big stresses, like the life changes, like, you know, losing a family member, losing your job, things like that. We all know that that really affects us physically. Most of us don't give nearly enough attention to the insidious day in and day out stresses that we face. That could be something like having a job that you really don't like. But you have to keep going because the economy is poor and you can't, there's no other jobs available in your field, so you got to stick with this. It could be that there's somebody at work, maybe a boss or someone that you're supervising, who where it's not a good fit, where you and they lock horns a lot or whatever. Could be that there's family situations going on, divorces happening, or illnesses that are really long and drawn out, and you're having to really adapt your day to be caretaking for someone who is not well, where they're never going to get better, and I'm not meaning this to sound harsh, but they're not going to die quickly either, right? And those are all the insidious kinds of stresses that we don't pay enough attention to. When we look at stress and what it does in the body, it triggers us to be in what's called the sympathetic response mode, which means that we are on the high alert for the next bomb, the next crisis, the next whatever, so that we can respond very quickly. It's the fight, flight, or freeze. And when we have that constant stress, we're always in that, just at the edge of being ready to fight or flee or to freeze, like the deer in the headlights. When we're in that situation, it shuts off your ability to digest well. It tells the brain, eating is not important. We need to be ready to run from the bear. So when your brain gets that message, you don't create enough saliva. When the brain gets that message, it tells the stomach, no more acid, no more acid. We can't deal with digesting protein right now. We've got to be ready to run. We've got to save that circulation for the large muscles and for the heart and the lungs so we can run or we can deck the guy, right? And so when we are in that persistent state of stress, it shuts off the digestive system. And that will make us burpier. It will make us fartier. Depending on how your body responds, it can take you straight into chronic constipation or chronic diarrhea or really stubborn constipation. And so when we see those things happening, we know that, yes, we probably should be taking enzymes of some sort, but we really need to be looking at stress because the stress is the core issue. So what do we do with the stress? It could be maybe you need to seek counseling and be talking this out with somebody so you're venting and getting rid of it and burning it out. Maybe you need to be exercising some. It could be as simple as going for a walk every day for 30 or 45 minutes at the end of your workday to just process what's gone on. It might be that you need some other physical activity. It might be that you need a massage or some other physical manipulation to release stress. It might be that you need some supplements. You might need some good nerve support by way of vitamins, minerals, or herbs, or maybe even essential oils to help you just go and let the stress go. Because the more we hold that in, the more we stiff upper lip the situation, the more we shut down the digestion. All right, so we need to make sure that we find the best options to help us manage the stress. And it might take trying several in order to manage the stress and to restart the digestive process properly. So that's one aspect that we need to be concerned about. The other aspect, as I alluded to at the very beginning of our time together, was age. Just as a young baby, an infant, doesn't have a mature enough digestive tract to handle steak and potatoes, that's why they're on mother's milk, hopefully. An older digestive tract loses its ability to digest things. All right, so by the time we hit the age of 35, even if our life was all blissful and perfect, we start losing our digestive enzymes. By the time we're 55, our digestive enzymes are typically down by half. And from there, it all goes downhill. As I'm aging, I'm finding my clientele is aging. So I'm in my 60s now, and I have a lot of clients that are in their 70s and 80s. And I'm watching this with them, that their systems are less tolerant of certain foods. And so we're needing to constantly reshape their eating plan, reshape their supplements to make sure we stay 2 steps ahead of where we think their body is going. So as we get older, we may find that we do better not just sequencing the foods to carbs, low carbs, protein, but literally having a carbohydrate snack, basically the carb component of your meal, and waiting a little bit before we have the non-carb snack. And waiting a little bit before we have the protein portion of the meal. We may need to give our system that time to actually process things. We may find that we do better on smaller portions of food, but eating a little more frequently. We may find that we need more digestive enzyme types of support, that we need more garden essence or more protein digestive aid or more of the digestive enzymes themselves in order to digest our food more efficiently and keep things moving through without a lot of fermentation. So as we look at how we feel our digestive system is working, what symptoms we have, we need to be cognizant of our food choices, our age, and the amount of stress. When we talk about food choices, the quantities of foods, the order in which we consume those foods. in order to come up with the most effective way to nourish ourselves, break that food down, get the most nutrient we can out of it, and keep the bowel working really well. So just want to check here. Any questions or concerns or comments? We have the chat box open. And so if you have any questions or concerns, that would be grand. But that is the information I have for you today. That do some self-investigation, experiment with the order in which you consume your foods at a mealtime. Look at your stress levels. And then from there, either sort out the supplements you need, whether it's for nerves and stress or digestion or both. And if that seems like a huge task, you can always reach out to me for an appointment and we can do the work together to craft a program for you to take you through the next couple of years. Excellent. That is all the information I have for you today. Thank you so much for being with me. I truly appreciate it. And, if I can be of assistance, be sure to reach out to me. And other than that, have a fabulous day. We'll talk to you later. Bye for now.